All right, so today's video is going to be much shorter. I'm really sorry that last one was so long. If you made it through it, thank you. If you didn't, I understand, or if you skipped around, whatever. So today's going to be much shorter, and then rather than just show a bunch of slides and definitely not going to talk about any math. I absolutely don't blame you if you skipped all that math. But just want to show you a few, I don't know if advanced is the right word, but just a few deeper things to do in Pro Tools as far as mixing and editing goes. And so first, I'm going to open up this session from a faculty trio we did 2 or 3 weeks ago. I don't know if anybody caught it. It was Paul Johnston. Shoot, who was this? It was clarinet, violin, and piano. I don't even remember all the faculty's names right now off the top of my head. Anyway, so I haven't even opened this since then. So the very first thing I'm going to do, like I would always, is go to Save As. And I'm just going to save this as today's date, which is 12. What is the date? 03. That way, anything I do here, I can always go back to my original. All right, we've talked about this before, just so you can always go back to what you started with. And I know exactly when I did this. If I open this, a year from now, 10 years from now, I know exactly when this session was made. So let's see what we got here real quick. And so I'm just recording the audio on my phone, so the quality of whatever I play back is not going to be great, and so I'm sorry about that. But mostly what I wanted to show is just some mixing and editing functions, features. And one of them is automation. I know I've shown a little bit of automation before, but one thing that I do a lot is with the faders, actually write in the volume automation top to bottom, usually like from start to finish. And I'll usually do that in one full pass just to kind of get what I think is a really kind of good starting point. Obviously after I've just set rough levels, like I can't show you right now, but the piano, the violin, the clarinet, and then the 2 room mics are already kind of set at whatever volume I thought sounded good at the time. So, but what I would do if I was going to mix this down is I would then turn on automation, and on the keyboard it's Apple or Command 4 on the numeric pad. It'll bring up this automation window here. A lot of these features I don't know off the top of my head where to find them, because I am just so accustomed to using the quick keys. But it's probably in Windows automation, yeah. So window automation. Now the red here for volume means that volume automation is already set to be recorded. Whatever you want to record, if I wanted to record any pan moves, mutes, send mutes, send pans, send volumes, or plug-in, you can choose what you want enabled for automation or not. And so in this case, volume automation is already set. That's all I really want for now. So that's cool. Now we can do this from the edit window or the mix window. It doesn't matter, but I'm going to switch to the mix window. I'm going to get this counter out of the way for now. So here's my 3 tracks. I have the piano on a stereo track, violin, clarinet, and then the room mics on a stereo track. You can see I've got a little bit of processing going on. I've got some EQ on the piano, violin, clarinet, not a whole lot going on, mostly rolling off some lows. Violin must have sounded a little scratchy or something to me, so I ducked a little bit of the highs up here. Clarinet's just a low frequency roll off or a high pass filter. Piano, I boosted a little in the lows, cut a little of the low mids, and that's about it there. And then on my print bus, I've got a little more low mid cut on everything. I've got a limiter. A limiter is, if I haven't clarified this before, it's basically a compressor. Pardon me. But they almost always have this ceiling parameter where you can set it to not go past a certain amount. So if 0 dB is like clipping, I have it set to minus 1.32. That was just random. I just grabbed it and dragged it somewhere, and that's where it landed. So I usually would go somewhere between 0.5 and minus 1, just so that I know I'm not getting any digital clips at all. And so this limiter will compress anything that gets up to this level. It's going to compress it so that those clips don't happen. Not sure why I did this, but I added another. Probably because this one was just a 2-band EQ, and I wanted, even though I think I've already rolled off all the low end on individual tracks, looks like I did it again, but then also boosted a little bit of the highs overall. Again, this is the print bus, so this is affecting everything. And then here's my frequency spectrum here that I just really like to have that as a reference as I'm mixing. So again, sorry, back to automation. Now the room mics are capturing their balance, their dynamic, and that's not something that I would typically adjust the volume on, maybe from piece to piece, but not throughout the piece, right? So those room mics, I'm just going to leave set where they are, and I'm going to not automate that at all. But on these 3 tracks, I'm going to turn the automation on to be able to write volume automation on it. And these buttons here are your automation functions. So right now it's set to read automation, auto read, but there is no automation written, so it's not doing anything. So I've got all 3 of these selected. If I hold Shift Option, it's going to affect all of them simultaneously. You can turn it off. Automation read, automation touch means it'll just stay where it's at until you touch it. And if you touch a fader, it'll write that volume automation, but then when you let go of that fader, it's going to snap right back to where it was. Latch is similar, except it's going to do nothing until you touch it, but after you touch it, it's going to leave it there. And then write is going to just record every move you make from top to bottom. So if you, let me just show a quick example. So here's what automation write would look like. I'm going to go back to my edit window. And on these buttons here where it says waveform, if I go Shift Option, again, you can change this to see your volume. You can see several different readouts here, but if we change this to volume, now this black line here represents where our volume's at, which is at, in this case, this is at minus 6.4, minus 8.3, minus 13.6, etc. So if I'm in automation write, it's going to write any movements I make until I hit stop. So let me show that. So you can see that black line is now turning red because it's writing this automation in. And if I grab these faders, now I grab them, I'm moving them, I'm continuously moving them, it's recording all of this. So if I played this back, it's going to follow all these volume moves that I'm making. And if I let go, well, it's just going to keep writing it right there. And it'll keep doing this until I hit stop. So I hit stop, and now you can see it switched from write to auto touch mode. And that's a preference that I have set so that now it's recorded these moves, it's saving them, but now I can still go back and do touch automation if I want. So if we look at our mix window, you'll see the faders move. It recorded those volume moves that I made. Now, because it's still in auto touch, I can still grab these and write automation. But if I let go of these faders, you see it snaps right back to where the previous automation was. So that's auto touch. So you can keep it going, and if you feel like, oh, the clarinet got a little too loud, I can just bring down the, actually they're all grouped right now, ignore that. So I can just be like, oh, the clarinet's a little loud, let me bring down the clarinet. Now you can see I'm just lowering the clarinet, right? So that's automation touch. If we switch this to latch, let me just start playback from a little further up here. So I'm in auto latch. And now when I let go of the faders, you can see they stay right where they are. So that's what automation latch does. And so obviously all of these have their own, there's circumstances where you would want to use one or the other, or, not necessarily, like what I'm trying to say is you might switch back and forth in the same mix, right? There's certain reasons why you would want to be in latch mode, write mode, or touch mode, and so you can just easily switch back and forth. And if you want to see the automation you're writing, you would just go into this volume view up here, right? So, and again, you can look at mutes if you wanted to automate mutes. That's you would see that here as well. But another useful way to affect automation is just to draw it in, right? So if the clarinet, if you can see the waveform right here, it gets a lot. Let me actually increase it a little bit. You can see relative to what's happening before and after. This is the clarinet's being played louder right here, right? And say I thought that was too loud. Well, if I hold the command button or the Apple button, I can make a edit point right there. And I can make another edit point right there. And now I can just grab, by going to the top half of this waveform, you can see how my cursor changes. And that's a function of the special tool. You can see my cursor changes from selector to the trimmer. But since we're in the volume view, it's going to trim this automation. So I can now grab it here, and I can lower that whole piece of audio. And you'll see the fader. You'll see the fader jump down and follow that automation. Just snaps right there. And so this is using this kind of trim automation is really useful when you're trying to affect either a very small piece or like the whole thing. And what do I mean by that? Well, I wouldn't want to go through this whole piece of music and go like, oh, that was too loud. Let me bring that down. This was too quiet. Let me bring that up. Because that's tedious. It requires, listening over and over, making these adjustments, switching to the keyboard and mouse. That's why I like to use the faders. And as I'm going, I just like to use my fingers and my ears and just kind of create a decent balance, right? And then after the fact, if I'm listening back again and I feel like, oh, you know what, right there, that was a little too quiet on the clarinet. Now I can just bring that piece up by a couple dB, 2, 3 dB, whatever, right? So to me, it's just a little more musical to do it as a performance, really. It's kind of like doing it as a performance, mixing as a performance, sort of. And then I use this trim automation, like if I felt like, okay, you know what, that whole piece, the clarinet was too loud. Now I can highlight, I can just highlight this whole region, and I can bring down. It's retaining all the automation I wrote. I just want to bring everything down a little bit, and I can do that, or bring everything up, obviously, But it retains all the relative automation you wrote. You're just bringing everything globally up or down by a certain amount. So that's mostly what I use the trim style of automation for. like I want to bring this whole thing down, or after I've written my automation, then it's like, okay, actually that was a little too loud there. And so you see, I didn't actually make those breakpoints that time. I selected a piece of audio, and when you select it and then grab it with the trimmer, it'll just make those edit points for you. So I didn't have to do that the first time, but that's just one thing. And, well, it doesn't matter. This is all just an example. So say this is some automation I wrote, but then this note right here, like the very beginning of that waveform, whatever that is, you know, I just want to bring that little piece down. Well, I can then make a breakpoint there, or an edit point, and if I make one on each side of it, and then grab the middle one, now I've just dipped that peak right there. So just a little more kind of fine tuning you can do with your mixing. You know, once you've set your basic levels, to go in and just fine tune things as needed. Obviously, you know, maybe it doesn't need to be done. You know, especially on like orchestral stuff, that's kind of like set it and forget it. You know, you typically wouldn't mess with the levels. You just set up your mics, get a good level, a good balance between the mics, and that's kind of good to go. And even for something like this, a small ensemble in the recital hall, I'm probably not going to really write any automation unless something really stands out. So for that matter, once, you know, if I did all this and then decided, oh, that sucked, you can just highlight it all, hit delete, and you can wipe out all your automation. Let's see. Another thing I wanted to show you is some drum editing. What was I going to use? Here. So here's all my drums, right? A whole lot of drum tracks, actually. There's a tool called Strip Silence. Now, I might have talked about this a little bit. I clearly didn't use it on here, and it does exactly what the name says. It strips out all the silence, all these little gaps in between notes. If you were really trying to, you know, super produce, I guess anything really, you know, like see, for instance, on the toms are only being played here, 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 here. If I wanted to strip out all of this extra, you know, let me turn my group off. What's essentially kind of dead air, you know, I could just highlight and then cut it, right? That's definitely one way to do it. But what if I wanted to cut out everything in between all of these snare hits? There's a whole lot of those, and I don't want to do that manually, right? That's going to take forever. Now, I wouldn't necessarily do this on, I don't do this a lot anyway, unless the bleed, if the bleed is really an issue and it's really kind of messing up the sound and the mix, if, like for instance, in the tom mics, if all of this bleed that's, you know, these are all the snare hits and the kicks that the tom mics are just picking up, right? If that was really messing with the mix in any way, that might make sense. Probably wouldn't ever bother with something like a snare like this, especially if it's, you know, every beat. But on Pro Tools or on the keyboard, Command 8 brings up. Oh no, that's Beat Detective. Let's see. What's Strip Silence? Apple U? Yes. Command U brings up this Strip Silence function, and it's probably, let's see, clip. I don't know where it is in the menu up here, but it's Command U. There we go. Edit Strip Silence. Command U or Apple U. So, and you can see right away, that it put all these lines in here. And those lines are determined by these parameters. So you can set your threshold, which is going to look for the size of your peak, right? It's going to determine based on the size of the peak, what are we calling a beat or not a beat, right? So if you have a lower or a, well, yeah. So as you raise your threshold, it's going to discern more and more what is a beat and what isn't. So the more I increase it, we can see it's getting more and more of these beats. But now I went so far that if I zoom in, you can see it's going to start chopping some of the actual signal out. Pardon me. So the more you raise your threshold, the more it's going to say, well, this audio is not in that threshold. This is, but this is not. And there are cases where you might want that. But you can fine tune it with these parameters, right? You can set your minimum strip duration, so it's going to go long or short. Let me zoom out a little so you can see what's happening. So set your minimum strip duration. Once you pass a certain point, it's like, okay, it's going to take all of this. The clip start pad, if I zoom in a little more. So the start and end pads are just to give you a little bit of wiggle room. Like if right now, say it's chopping off some of that tail, well, I can adjust the end pad. If I want this, if the threshold is right, but now I just need to extend the ending a little bit or extend the start of it a little more, right? And once you do that, if I zoom out, so it looks like we've got everything. There's a couple things where it didn't grab all the silence, but you know, those are multiple snare hits in a row, you know, rolls. So we can go separate. So now it made all new regions. It just cut everything into its own region, and now we go strip, and boom. All the space in between these snare hits is now gone, right? And then obviously some of these, like I said, it didn't grab. You could just, if this was something you were really trying to do, you could then just go throughout where it missed, and obviously this saves you a bunch of time if this was an effect you were trying to do. Now you can do it on multiple tracks. Command U. I can do it to both. Whoops. I can do it to, you know, my whole drum kit if I want. I can do it to several tracks all at once. Let's see here. So here it's getting a little trickier. There it looks like it's retained all the tom rolls that we got going on. It's definitely leaving in quite a bit that I don't want. Separate, strip, close this. So you can see all these little regions that it missed. And, you know, again, that's one reason I don't use this a whole lot. I would if I actually needed to, well, for exactly this purpose, if I really needed to separate the silence or to get rid of bleed in my drum mics, I would use strip silence, and then I would do exactly this. I would just go and clean up kind of all the bits that it missed, and then, you know, I might after the fact put a little fade, just, you know, in case there's any pops somewhere, you know, put a fade. And so I might do something like that. I don't very often, but it is a useful feature. On dialogue, it's super helpful on dialogue, because then, you know, it's pretty clear what you want to keep and what you don't want to keep. So if you're trying to get the room noise out of a vocal or just a voiceover you're recording, strip silence can be pretty useful. Another thing, if you are trying to set something into like a proper timing, right? Like say, let me find the find the bass here. I'll bring this bass up in between my kicks here. So now again, I don't know if you can really hear that or not, but so I've just soloed the bass and the kick. And you know, let's say the bass player played out of time. You know, his timing was bad. And it's like, wow, that sounds awful, right? So, but I know that this beat right here, this bass note should be lined up with this kick, right? If I know that, I can zoom in. Well, I don't really need to zoom in, but I will just so you can see it. If I go to this button up here, this is the tab to transient button. So if my cursor's right here, when I hit the tab key, it's going to tab to the next transient, the next peak that it sees on that track right there. And then I can make an edit point, make a break point right there. So I've just cut this audio region, right? And I know that this bass hit needs to line up with this kick right here. So I can do the same thing. I'm going to just go back here. I'm going to hit tab. And you see it went to that, so it recognized that as a transient. But that's not the one I want. So I just hit tab again, and it brings me there. Now, instead of making an edit point, I could, but I don't need to. I'm going to make a marker. So on your window up here, markers, if you just hit plus, it's going to create a new marker. Doesn't matter what you call it. You can just leave it as location 10, whatever this one defaulted to, and hit enter. So it's going to make a location marker right there. And I know this bass hit needs to match up, needs to line up with that kick. Now what I'm going to do, my cursor is right here exactly where I want it, right? I'm going to click on this region with the grabber tool, so in the bottom half here with the grabber tool, and I'm going to hold control and click on this region, and it's going to snap it to exactly where my cursor is. Boom. So now our timing is correct. Well, if you're asking, well, what about everything back here? Well, what about it? If he was playing in time relative to himself, he's just out of time with the drums. All I need to do is drag this back, and now everything back here is matched up to where it would have been before. I'm stumbling over my words here. So I chose this region just for the timing, just to line it up here. This now is obviously out of time. So if we just deleted that, I still can drag back all that audio. I didn't lose anything. Remember, it's pretty tough to actually lose something that's not recoverable or not undoable in Pro Tools. So that's just one easy way to adjust timings, especially if you know that relative, if you're trying to sync two things that are out of sync, but you know that if you line them up right, they will be. That's an easy way to do it. That's exactly what you would do with if you had video. If you've got a slate, you've got a really, really big peak, they would say like, scene one, take one, click. And that transient, that peak would be your, what you're lining up to. So you would chop everything up to that point. And then in your video, you would line this region up, say, this is our audio from that take, whatever. And you would line it up to where that occurs on camera, and then just drag everything back, and now your audio and your video would be synced up. So, and just one other thing I wanted to kind of touch on today is compression. I know we've talked a lot about compression. It's a tricky thing to really explain. It's just something you kind of gotta do. You gotta trial and error and really just listen. You just gotta listen, and and keep messing with things until you kind of find that sweet spot and you understand what is too much compression, what needs compression versus what doesn't need compression, when you are compressing something too much. It really just takes your ears and playing with it. But one thing that's really useful to do is, and it can avoid over-compressing, is to use 2 compressors in a row. So on this is a Christmas tune we did with the choir. So this is Carol of the Bells. This is going to be on the Christmas or the Holiday Fest stream. So here's how I recorded it on the day of. I had it printing to a stereo track, and it's recorded really low, right? Now on something like this, a choir or orchestral things, chamber music, stuff like that, you don't really want to compress the audio. You don't want to mess with the dynamic range or the dynamics of that type of performance, because it's just not really appropriate for something like that. But I do want to raise the overall level of this, and now obviously I could just in my mix window just raise the fader up and reprint it, but you can see sometimes it's really, really quiet and sometimes it's pretty darn loud. And so if I just raise this fader, well, now this is very likely going to clip if all I've done is crank the volume on it. So I do want to compress it to avoid those clips, but I don't want to really hear the compression, if that makes sense. I don't want to notice that it's been compressed. I just want to raise the overall volume while controlling any kind of peaks or clips rather, but not hear that compressor engage. And a good way to do that a lot of times is to have one compressor doing some work followed by another compressor doing some more work. So in this case, I used a compressor followed by a limiter. And the limiter is I'm really just using it for that out ceiling so that I have no chance of digital clips, right? My threshold is not very low, so it's not engaging much at all. You can see it's engaging a little bit when they get to that loudest peak. But other than that, this limiter is not engaging at all. All that work is being done by this compressor, but you can see when they're singing lower like this, the compressor's not even engaging. My threshold is not set. My threshold's not set to where it's even engaging, except in these really loud parts. So I'm mostly just gaining the level. So the gain, I've got an extra 12 dB of gain on this compressor. So I'm essentially doing exactly this. I'm raising the volume, right, like I would be here, except I'm compressing it minimally at this certain threshold. So I'm able to raise the level of all of this audio, right, which is what I want to do. I also want to raise the level of this audio, but I don't want to raise it too much. So that's when the compressor kicks in at this threshold I set so that I don't get any peaks. And then I put it through this limiter just to raise it even a little bit more overall, and with this hard output ceiling that I know I don't have any digital clips. And so what that allowed me to do was go from, and again, I don't know if you can really hear this, but here's my original print. And then with that compressor and limiter, you can see how much bigger this waveform is. We're not really adjusting any of the dynamics of this, right? The waveform is almost identical. It's just the amplitude. It's just the overall volume that I increased. You can see the compressor did kick in here, right? Because It's a little disproportional in these louder parts because the compressor is engaging there, but not a lot. And so here's the difference from the original to the final print. So hopefully that made sense. Hopefully that was helpful. I'm sorry this still went on longer than I wanted to. I know it's probably not super exciting just watching a 40-minute video. So I will end it here. Just last thing though, really quick, I alluded to the possibility of a quiz. What I want you to do, rather than some quiz based off of these what might have been tedious videos to watch, and if they are, I'm sorry. What I'd really like for you all to do is just send me an email and just let me know something that you learned this semester that you thought was interesting or really useful or informative. Maybe something you didn't know before or something that you were really hoping to learn about and you did. But also, more importantly, what did I not do that you wanted? What did we not cover that you wanted to cover? And obviously, we still have some time, but just any improvements that you think I could have made. I know that obviously we were all dealing with some pretty wacky circumstances, but is there anything, and especially for those of you who are enrolled for the next course, is there anything that we can improve on the way the class was conducted? Because I have a very strong feeling that the circumstances of this semester are probably going to follow us into the next one. So, yeah, just send me an email. Hopefully if you can get to it over the weekend or by early next week, that'd be great. And that is it. I'll keep you posted on next week. And yeah, as always, any questions, any comments, any concerns, let me know. I am around. If you want to get in the studio, if you want any help with anything, I'm around, so just let me know. All right, everybody. See ya.